welcome back to another episode of Walk in Christ Podcast, a show where we encourage you to find spiritual and financial balance in their life through the abundance grace of God. On our podcast today, we have Mr. Brian Adamson. Mr. Brian Adamson is a founder and leading educator for iflip University, which is a real estate education firm that works to help new and seasoned investors start and maintain their real estate investment career. Mr. Brian is a well-seasoned investor himself and started investing in real estate probably while in college. And today we're going to discuss Mr. Brian's journey and how he teaches people to get started flipping properties with no money down. So thank you for being here, Mr. Brian.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Dami.
How are you doing today?
I'm good, man. I'm good. It's been a busy Tuesday, Monday.
That definitely sounds about right.
Yeah.
So what led you to get started in real estate?
So for me, man, I started 15 years ago, back in 2006. I'm a Detroit native. You know, around 17 years old, started getting into trouble, was mixed up in the streets, and you know, it was a really dark time in my life, right? And I knew that I had a void there. I was looking at a 4 to 10 year felony before I graduated high school. You know, a couple months after that, you know, going into college, had a full ride academic scholarship, which, you know, I ended up losing it. I flunked out my freshman semester. And all the while, my now wife, then girlfriend, was pregnant. So by the time I turned 18, in the span of 6 months from graduating high school, had a 4 to 10 year felony, was kicked out the house, lost my academic scholarship, and had a child on the way. And so, you know, as I mentioned, it was a dark time for me, and it led me back to Christ. Though I had been kind of in the church my whole life. I stopped going when I was about 13, didn't really find the point, still believed in God, but just didn't see the value in going to and attending church. And long story short is that, you know, I was led to go back to church. And, you know, during that time, I gave my life to Christ. I got baptized. And although I didn't fully understand what that meant, you know, in total transparency, it started out as fire insurance, right? But that was the catalyst to start to change things. And God was starting to work on me and in me and through me. And so not too long after that, you know, I ended up, I beat the case. And, you know, we had my daughter. I did leave college. I got rematriculated, but I left and went to get some insurance for her and my wife, and you know, started working in a plant, and you know, eventually figured out that we needed to go back to college and kind of finish that. And so that's what we did. And while I was there, for the first time, I had been presented an opportunity with some real money that was legit, and you know, outside of working a job, and it was real estate. So a friend of mine back in Detroit at the time, he was flipping, you know, what we would call DF class properties, right? Low income stuff. But at that time in 2006, that was at the height of stated income loans. So any and everybody that wanted a mortgage, if you had a post and could fill out an application, the banks would lend you money. That was the start of the economic downturn in 2008. And so these people weren't financially savvy enough to close on the houses. So I would gift them their down payment. My boy would flip the houses to them, and he would give me a return on my investment. So that's how I got started, from a $7,000 refund check my junior year in college. Yeah, and then from there, you know, we did a multitude of those, and then I ended up buying some of my own investment properties while in college. I bought 3 rental properties, and then I built a new construction home in 2007, my senior year before graduating, for me and my family to move into. And so, you know, things were going well. I got my engineering degree, industrial engineering. I didn't think I was going to use it. I really was just going to continue to do real estate. And then shortly after graduating, the market contracted. We were at the height of the market. We were on a bubble. You know, ignorance is expensive and we can't afford it. I tell people that all the time. I was ignorant to the fact of what was going on in the housing market. I was just being opportunistic. And so long story short, everything that I had leverage on, I was upside down on quickly. But because of the lending efforts, I had built up enough liquidity that when the market turned, started buying up rental properties at the bottom of the market. So I was, you know, in my mid to young 20s, and I was, you know, I bought over 20 rental properties from 2008 to 10. And that's kind of how I got my start. Was, you know, started out with the $7,000 refund check, pivoted into buying rental property, and did that for the first 8 years of my career until finally, caught an infomercial, went to the free event, the upsell to the next event. I just wasn't privy for that kind of stuff coming from Detroit. I didn't know about mentorship. I didn't know about networks. I was just out here being opportunistic, doing it on my own. And finally, when I found that, made the very sizable investment in myself, leveraged my credit, my wife's credit, the cash I had on hand, and finally joined a network, got mentorship, learned the bigger business they call real estate, learned about leveraging other people's money, went out and raised over $1 million in my first 7 months in that program from private investors, and bought 20 something flips and learned how to wholesale. And the list goes on. And many years after that, was able to pivot and then start my mentorship program, which, to your point that you mentioned when we started, iflip University is our international real estate education platform where we teach individuals how to fix and flip wholesale and cash flow properties remotely. That's our online on-demand application. But then we also have the apprenticeship program where I mentor students one-on-one internationally as well. We're in 4 countries on how to go out and build wealth through real estate investing.
Wow. 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 What a story. That's a wow. That's a wonderful story. Wow.
Thanks, man.
Wow. That definitely got me motivated. So I guess, so let's just take a step back, going from your childhood and I guess high school, you're facing a felony, you're facing a child coming. How were you able to find God in that moment? Like, what led you back to God in that moment?
I think it was just a real void, right? I knew that it was a void. I was filling it in with drinking, drugging, and it, nothing can replace God, right? Like, we may try to manufacture all of these different things, but the reality was for the first time ever in my life, although I always believed in God and I knew He was there, it was like He was calling me. And I've been to church 1,000 times, and this particular time, myself and my best friend, we were there, and we both almost stood up simultaneously and took the walk to the front of the church and made our commitment, our salvation at that point. And I had just never been moved that way in church. And so it was definitely the spirit that came upon me. And, it's just His divine handiwork is unbelievable. Like, me looking back at everything in my life, and as I tell the story, and oftentimes I get the reaction that you had as I'm telling it, and it's like, it's just all in divine order. Like, I had to go through all of that. I tell the story, and I don't want to digress too much, but I got an older brother and an older sister. My brother's 12 years older, my sister's 7 years older. And for whatever reason, my mom got both of them baptized when they were young, like 10 years or younger. And for me, like, I never understood why she had never got me baptized when I was young, right? And I just found it so intimidating to ever have to take that walk and go to the front of the church and I think part of that was probably why I didn't do it sooner, but I was glad that I didn't. I was glad that it happened the way that it was supposed to, that there was a definite need in my life to add Him in that capacity at that point. And it's just grace, mercy, and just, I'm just grateful that the way that it all happened, because I had a different appreciation for finding Him at the time that I did, rather than it just been a formality of my parents just kind of pushing me into doing it.
That is definitely great. That is definitely great. So that leads me to my next question. So you overcome that challenge, and you got introduced to real estate. And you was part of you was invested in during the 2008, 2009 crash. So what was something that you learned from that experience that changed your whole view on real estate?
Yeah, I would say that cash on cash is by far the best metric that you can ever look at real estate from. A lot of people, and don't get me wrong, myself included, I just bought an apartment building a couple of weeks ago, and it's got $200,000 in equity in it day one. So equity is important, But I think that, during 2006 and 7, especially with jumbo loans and, you know, um, appraisers, overstating values, like everybody was so fixated on equity at that point in time, and it just was unsustainable, right? And when the market contracted, I built a brand new house in 2007 and lost 40% of my value within like an 8-9 month time frame. And when you see that, it just makes you really realize that it doesn't really matter how much equity you have. It matters what's your cash on cash return. How much money can I put in this and truly get a ROI on that money? Because in some markets, and I know some investors that invest in like New York, where you really don't get a cash on cash return. They do play the equity game, but that market is such that it allows that, right? That's just kind of the makeup of that market in New York. But for 90+% of the country, you really better be focused on what's your cash on cash return.
That's great. Could you elaborate on the cash and cash returns for those who may not understand what the cash and cash and return is?
Sure. So it's just a fundamental of, if I put $100,000 into something and I get $1,000 out of it, then I got a 10% return, right? A cash on cash. That's my cash on cash return on that money that I invested.
That makes sense. That makes sense. That is definitely great. So you went through that process. You've started building it up. So how did you go about looking at properties, saying, okay, this is the house I'm gonna flip, or this is the house I'm gonna get cash and rental income on. So how did you go about deferring which one you would do, which is property?
So it for us, and something that we really hone on in our program, is getting clear on goals, right? So when you come in, we want to understand what's the objective. So for some people, is I love my job, I just want to make more supplemental income to support my lifestyle. I want to go on trips, I want to do all these things. And so for those individuals, then it's a better focus at looking at wholesaling and fix and flip, because that's great active income that you can do in parallel or in tandem with your job, right? Whereas there's other individuals, who come to me and say, Brian, I want to get out of my job. I want to retire from corporate America. I got to get out of here. Then we look at, while active income is okay, we really look at a strategy to incorporate passive income as quickly as possible, so that you can start looking at residual mailbox money, right? So what happens is, let's just say you make, 40 grand a year. It's roughly, a little over $3 grand a month. And you needed to replace that income in order to still give you the same lifestyle that you needed. Then we would look at, what type of investments do you need to make on the cash flow side, that you can make these one-time investments that's going to pay you residually thereafter. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
So that's kind of high level, to figure out what's the plan, what's the goal. And then from there, more specifically, as you look at deals themselves, if I look at a deal and it has a tremendous amount of equity in it, then, and just so everybody's clear, that the equity is the difference between the money you have invested in it and the how much it's worth, right? So when we're looking at a fix and flip, let's just say, it's a $50,000 purchase, it's a $50,000 rehab, and it's $150,000 value. So I know I got $50,000 in equity to play with in that deal, right? And for those reasons, depending on how much equity is in the deal, I may make the decision that is most advantageous to flip that deal. Or there may be not enough equity in the deal for me to get the return that I anticipate on the flip. And so for those reasons, it may be a different investor out there with a different profit margin expectation that I could wholesale that deal to. So instead of me, flipping it at the 150, maybe I get it locked up at 50 and I wholesale it to somebody else for 60, and I make $10,000. They'll be all in at 110. Let them go flip it for 150, right? And then there may be a scenario where I say, you know what? The purchase and rehab is going to be, 100,000. The house is worth 120. where there's only $20,000 in equity. That's not enough room to flip the house. But with $20,000 in equity, I'm gonna look at this $100,000 investment. If I can make $1,000 a month on this 100,000 and I'm making a 12% return, then does that make sense for me to put the 100,000 here and make that kind of cash on cash return? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's just kind of the process of evaluation. But again, I think that more importantly is getting clear on what the goal is. Like, what do you really want to accomplish out of real estate investing? And then it's easier to reverse engineer, the process by which you get there.
You're 100%. You're 100% right. And I know like a lot of investors or real estate investors, they have like a specific rule, like the 1%, 2%. Is there any specific rule that you follow in Pacific or?
Well, so we encourage our students, at least on their flips, to look at 25+% cash on cash returns, because typically once you add in financing, because we teach you how to do it without having any money or credit, right? But by evaluating the deal from a pure cash on cash return perspective, if the deal works at 25+% cash on cash return, more often than not, it also works once you add in financing and fees associated with the cost of money, to where the deal is still profitable for you as well. So that's one of our sticklers. And then, short of that, it's just unique to the investor. For me to do a flip at this point in my career, my number is a little bit different in terms of what my expectations are than somebody that's coming in and getting into the business. Because for me, it's just a function of my time that's invested and my energy that's invested in something. And that changes, right? Over 15 years, that's changed quite a bit for me. But I do identify with the 1% rule. I get it in theory, but to be honest, even on my rentals, like, I'm looking for something way better than 1% return. You know what I'm saying? But that is a good baseline for people if they didn't have nothing to go off of.
That's great. That's great. And I want to go back to something you said earlier in terms of like markets. Like you said, New York market is kind of hard to kind of do flips, compared to other markets. So how do you go about choosing a market, or finding a market? Okay, this is a market, especially now, which everything is on an all-time high and people are selling houses. How can someone, say, okay, I'm gonna go to this place and start investing?
That's a really good question. So we teach you inside the course or the mentorship program how to find markets, and then how to identify markets within those markets. So and there's a tool, I'll give it out for free. It's bestplaces.net. And inside of that, once you know how to use it, there's a lot of data that's collated there to tell you specifically what markets you should be in, what ARVs inside those markets you should be approaching. It's a lot of data there, but you got to know what you're looking for, right? The site is free, which is why I gave it out, but you still need to know what you're looking for, because it could be information overload, because it's a lot of data there. And so you need to know specifically what metrics should you be looking at in order to make those determinations. But it's not a guessing game. And I'm glad you asked that question. You shouldn't, to some degree, just based on relationship with people in certain placements throughout the country, you may say, you know what, my homeboy live in Atlanta. I always wanted to like look at stuff in Atlanta. Maybe he can help me. Like, I think that's a good enough starting point. But then we have a responsibility to drill in and make sure we're making decisions based on data, and not just arbitrarily the fact that, we like a market, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. That definitely makes sense. So that leads us to my next question. What are your thoughts on the current market? Like, where do you see the market going? A lot of people think it's in a bubble. A lot of people think, the time for it to pull down. Lumber is at all-time high. And things are getting very expensive.
Yeah, I think that what we see right now is a byproduct of pure economics. Economics 101 is supply and demand. Right now, there is a shortage of supply, and whenever demand is higher than supply, then that means prices will increase, right? That's purely what we see right now. It's not that the market is hot, but it's hot relative to the fact that there's a shortage. Whenever there's a shortage, then there's, an increase. And whenever there's a surplus, prices will come down. And so, once these rent moratoriums are lifted, which that just got pushed back again, and these forbearances, I think we're going to see a healthy diet of inventory hit the market to the tune of a couple million properties over the next 6 months. And when that happens, while I don't think that it's going to grossly affect every market, I think some markets are going to be grossly affected to a point where prices are going to come down in a lot of cases. And I think as a whole, it'll kind of balance out the market, that we'll see prices start to normalize in a lot of places. And then to answer the other part of that, hyperinflation is happening right now. The media keeps telling us that it's not, which if you're paying attention, anything the media tells you, you should always go the opposite way. Hyperinflation is happening as we speak, and it has to, because we're just printing money, right? We got a fiat currency. It's not attached to anything. And so, hyperinflation is happening. What I can tell everybody is you got a couple different choices. You could leave your money in the bank and lose, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% of its value, or you can park that money into assets. I like real estate. It's a tangible asset I have more control over, and you can hedge against inflation. So if inflation goes up, typically year over year is 2 to 3%. It goes up this year 8 to 10. Well, what do you invest your money in order to get at minimum an 8 to 10% return? Well, real estate is a great place to do that. And that way you can hedge against the cost of goods and all the rest of it. But if you leave your money in a bank, then you're going to lose the value of your money is going to decrease significantly.
No, you're 100% right. So that leads to my next question based on that, because some people on the sideline may, wonder, you know, in terms of flipping properties, would I go for like apartment building or just a single family, multifamily? Which one would you prefer, like when you talk about flipping, in Pacific?
Yeah, I would say, again, like, I try not to give blanketed statements. Like, I again think it has to be unique to the goal, but I will also say as a generality that I think everybody should start off flipping houses. I'm speaking only in terms of flipping. Like, I'm not saying everybody needs to become a flipper, but if you're gonna flip something, I think everybody needs to flip a few houses to get a really good understanding on the process, all the nuances. It's just a great experience, a great learning experience, because what happens is when contractors is the Achilles heel of our business, right? You can't, if you don't have good contractors, you can't win. And I lost $500,000 in the process of figuring this out at one point in time. And so, for me, we take a lot of time in our program drilling in on contractor management, how to vet them, how to hold them accountable, how to pay them accordingly, how to fire them. Because again, they are the backbone of your business, whether you like it or not. And so I encourage people to flip on a single family side first, because it's one property, right? Everything that you do inside of an apartment building is economy to scale. So, I could have, let's just say I had 3 projects going on a single family side. Because they're not all under one roof, there's parity. Like 2 of them may come out good, 1 of them may come out not so good, but I could balance that across all 3. And same is true, there's advantages to invest in a commercial multifamily as well, because the amount of doors, if I don't collect rent on 1 unit and I got 6 of them, well, that's much different than on the single family side. If the one tenant don't pay, then that's a bad investment, right? At the same time, though, on the contracting side, if I got 6 doors and I got a guy that's doing the entire building, well, if he fumble, that's all under one roof, right? So now your issue is extrapolated out and is there. You can't get rid of it. That's one asset that you have this festering problem at. So I always encourage people, start out on the single family side, really get the rhythm, get the cadence to renovate and all of that, and then you can scale up and do apartments after that.
That's great. That's great. And you mentioned something. How important are contractors? You know, you saying that you lost half a mil. So how important are contractors and making sure you get the right contractor?
Yeah, it's literally everything. You can't win in this business if you don't have good ones. And so, and even good ones turn to bad ones over time. It's like being into a it's in a relationship, right? People in a relationship, man, woman, otherwise, eventually somebody takes somebody for granted, right? That's just what it is. It's human nature. And even when you have good contractors, over time they will take you for granted, and you may have to fire them and then bring them back. And it's a dance, it's a rhythm. Like, to me, there is no balance in life. It's all a rhythm. And dealing with contractors is also a rhythm. You have to be very intuitive, um, dealing with people and building rapport and starting to understand who they are more than what they do, right?
Mhm.
I think that's the most critical piece, is understanding who they are than what they do. I was just talking to one of our students earlier today and told him, I said, listen, 90% of this business is understanding people, building rapport. Um, that's 90% of it. Understanding people, building rapport. The 10% is the X's and O's, right? And if you don't get that 90% right, the 10 will never work.
Mhm. So that leads me to my next question I'm thinking right now. If I'm not a people person, would this business be the right business for me?
Absolutely. The difference is, though, is and it's only absolutely because of what you said. You said, if I'm not a people's person, does this business work for me? And the answer is absolutely, because if you're wise enough to identify you're not a people's person, that means you can hire somebody that is, or partner with somebody that is. Let them go out and handle all of the rapport building and the management and all the rest of it. You just may be really good at identifying good properties. You may be great at the 10% and find somebody that's great at the 90%. And the two of you in tandem can go out and build a tremendous business together.
Okay. Are you big on partnerships? Is that something that you teach a lot in your program, or it depends on the situation?
So, believe it or not, we actually have quite a few husband and wife combinations in our program. And so those are partnerships, whether people look at it that way or not. They are, in fact, partnerships. And a lot of people, most people like to work alone. But I find that most people that come into this business have at least the people person dynamic. And that's a great starting point. But at some point, even those people struggle, because then you need an operator, right? Because you can get so consumed with the people person aspect that you really not as effective in running a business, if that makes sense.
That
And
makes sense.
so, a lot of it you don't have to have figured out from day one. I don't want to intimidate anybody by this conversation. If you got, you need these four components: the desire, you got to get the education, then you become a practitioner. You got to take action, and then you do that long enough, you become an expert. And so I just tell everybody, start fundamentally with number one: do you have a desire? Like what me and Dami are talking about is great, but I don't want anybody to be intimidated to think you got to have all of these intangibles in order to come in and be successful. You got to start with the desire, but then it's your responsibility directly after that to get the education. If you come in and get the education, it's going to give you the fundamentals, the systems, the processes, and the procedure about how to go about doing things. And then from that, then you can start to see where your weak spots are, right? But if you come in and you don't have any solid foundation to start from, then how do you really determine where your weaknesses are? You don't. You always chasing your own tail. And so I would tell anybody, at least just find somewhere, a program you can plug into and get the basic fundamentals, and what I like to call it, a tour guide or a GPS, right? I'm my students' navigation system. They drive, but I tell them, you know, look out over there because that's a pothole that'll tear your car up. Go this way at that four-way stop because you're gonna get there faster and avoid paying tolls, right? And so it's just critical to me that you have a navigation system by way of a mentor and a resource center by way of a network. You get those two things, and get like the core fundamentals of whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, and you setting yourself up for success.
That's great. That's great. That's great. So that leads me to talk about your program, iflip University. So who should be interested in joining the program? You know, how much does it cost, and what's like people can expect to be what can people expect being part of the program?
Yeah, absolutely. So iflip University, again, is our online on-demand platform. So initially, I just started, 3 years ago, my mentorship program, which is the apprenticeship program. That's with my one-on-one students. I found that two different things. One, everybody wasn't ready for that. Two, everybody couldn't afford that piece. And so I still wanted to figure out how to effectively get everybody the information so that they could stop shopping on YouTube, they could stop hopping from live to live and have one singular voice, the systems and processes and everything that we just talked about. And so iFlip provides that, right? It's low cost. You can learn, there's a course for how to build your cash flow system. There's a course for how to wholesale from the MLS. There's a course for how to wholesale off market. There's a course for how to build your fix and flip portfolio remotely. There's also a 2-day seminar. It's a $3,000 event that I used to do that I stopped doing during COVID last year. But we were able to record it due to COVID, and that's in there as well. It teaches you everything from real estate A to Z, how to create tax shelters for yourself, all those sorts of things, good CPA practices, everything fundamentally that you need, whether you want to fix and flip, wholesale, or cash flow, is all inside the course. And recently, just this weekend, rather than do a 4th of July sale, I talked with the team and I said, listen, I'm a firm believer in eliminating excuses, right? So the course was $1,000. We just lowered the cost to, because we were going to do a 50% off sale for 4th of July. I said, let's leave it 50% off the rest of the year. I want people to put their money where their mouth is. If you really say you committed to your future and your embetterment, then I'm gonna meet you right there where you're at. And we made it half off for the rest of the year. So for $497, it's tens of thousands of dollars worth of curriculum and intellectual property that can, like others, you can get it and you can go build your business from day one.
Wow, wow, that's definitely a great discount. That's
100%.
that's definitely a great discount. So that leads us to my next question. Being the fact that you've been a seasoned investor, what is some keys that you would say has helped you become a very good investor in terms of flipping properties?
Experience, right? That's got to be number one. And then right behind experience, it was getting a mentor and getting a network, which is why I provide those two as well, which I failed to expand on that. So we also have a one-on-one mentorship program called the Apprenticeship Program, where you get all of the iFlip curriculum, but then so much more, right? We do weekly webinars with me. You get one-on-one mentorship calls with me. You get to spend time in the field with me, whether it be in your market or to shadow me in other markets. It's a very intimate touch. You get one-on-one mentorship calls with myself. We help you set up your asset protection, your LLC with S corp election. There's lending resources for you available, as well as getting added to the private Facebook group as well. And so for anybody that is interested in that, there is, application process. We want to get to know who you are and make sure that, mutually it's a great fit. But you can, find me on Instagram at Brian_Adamson1, or even go to Brian-Adamson.com as well, and apply for the apprenticeship program. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that, because, there's been a lot of people that we've been able to help, especially through COVID, who lost their jobs, looking for something else to do. And many people who just been awakened by the fact that, everybody thought that the job was the most secure thing you could have. And COVID, showed everybody differently. And so we've been trying to reach and help as many people as possible. So those two resources right there can absolutely change your life if you let them, if you buy in and come in and do the work.
That's great. That's great. What the just to like to quickly to the iflip University. Is it like a course or is it like a whole, you know, bunch of videos you can just go click on it and you can go as you go or
Yeah, so they're all videos recorded by myself, and they're basically they're all chronicled in order.
okay.
You know what I mean? From setting up your LLC and what type of business bank account, like what bank institution should you bank with and for what reasons, all the way down to I just made this $50,000 check. Like, how do I avoid, maximum tax penalties and create tax shelters? It literally lays everything out from A to Z. How to find the realtors, the scripts that you would need, the contracts that you would need for raising private money. We spend a lot of time inside the program teaching you about how to raise capital for your deals. Teaching about the four different personality types and the psychology of doing business. Like I've seen a lot in the marketplace. I haven't seen anything like what we offer. We take a deeper dive into, we eliminate all of the fluff. I mean, it's a deep dive into all of the true fundamentals that you need to go out and get some tangible results for yourself.
That's great. That's great. I also want to ask, you said something earlier talking about the program is also in other countries, 3 to 4 countries,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not mistaken. So how were you able to like, I guess, yeah, can you elaborate more on that process? How are you able to use what you learned in the US to help other countries and other people in other countries?
Yeah. So just to clarify that, we have students in Denmark, Japan, and Afghanistan currently. We've taught them how to invest in the States. So we haven't
Okay.
invested internationally, but we have shown international investors how to invest in the States.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
That is great. That is definitely great. That is definitely great. So where do you see yourself in the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years?
Um, so right now I'm on a quest to, building 2,000 doors over the next 5 years, commercial multifamily and pivoting into hotels and things of that nature. Um, my mentorship program has become more or less a ministry for me at this point. Like, I really enjoy the time I get to spend with my students and not only teaching them about real estate, but as I shared at the top of this call, I got so much life experience, right? I've been, I retired from the streets, I retired from corporate America and, been able to do some tremendous things in business. But it's really just, for me, it's kingdom building. Um, and so I've been praying more and more. I like to say, probably for the first 34 years of my life, I'd be 38 in a couple months, that I was doing stuff and then asking God for help. And now I ask him for what he wants me to do and I help him in that, right? So my evolution is starting to change to where I'm really just listening to God and really just trying to get my direction from him in terms of what he wants me to do. And so when I get the question now about the 5 to 10 years, my goal, I guess, again, would be to go out and get 2,000 doors over the next 5 years and get into investing in, skyscrapers and hotels and things of that nature. But it's really just about operating in my purpose. I got a ton of potential. I could do a lot of different things. And that's kind of what I've been doing all my life, is just because of my potential. I can go in a lot of different ways. Um, but really want to make sure that my purpose is tied to whatever it is that I'm doing. And so I'm just listening intently at, what he wants me to do. What's my best use to serve the kingdom?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. That definitely makes sense. So I want to definitely say thank you for your time. Thank you for coming this afternoon to share how you got started in real estate, the process, of getting to your iflip University. I want you to leave us with a key, like a word.
It's all good. So, my advice to everyone would be this. At some point, more often than not, you stopped dreaming and started to default into whatever you had to do in order to provide for yourself, your family, and all the rest of it. What I'm telling you is this: God gave us all unique gifts and talents, right? And purpose. And while working a job may be fundamentally part of that, that's not all that you put on this planet to do. And so I encourage everybody to take some time, get still, and talk to God openly, right? And tell him he gives us the desires of our heart. Tell him point blank period what you want. Don't be intimidated by that. Don't think that it's got to be this cookie cutter conversation or this holier than thou conversation. It's a real conversation with your creator, just telling them like, this is what I really want out of life. And after that, listen. You know what I mean? And so essentially what I'm telling you to do is pray. I don't know what your prayer life look like, but start. You know what I mean? And really get clear on what it is that you want and start taking action towards that, because there's no reason why anybody should be relegated into a default life. You know what I mean? Like, you should better live life on full. And that means that you living and operating in your purpose and in the vein of whatever it is that you want to do in life. And so that would be my first that would be my first encouragement. And then after that, my mantra, our mantra of the company is stick to the mission. I think that that's paramount in anything, and anybody can identify and relate with that, right? Regardless of what it is that you're doing, there's going to be adversity, right? Biblically, it tells us that. Um, but you got to stick to the mission. Even when it looks bleak, you got to stick to the mission. And that's the only way that I've gotten to where I'm at in the last 15 years, is by carrying that mantra with me everywhere I go. And it permeates through my results, right? The only way you get to this point is by sticking to the mission. And so, that will be the two biggest words of advice. And as far as where you can find me, again, you can find me at brian-adamson.com. But the best place to find me would be on my Instagram, which is Brian_Adamson1. Send me a DM. Let me know you saw this podcast. I'd love to connect with you. I'm actually a guy that answers his DM. So, and Dami could tell you that. And, I'd love to have some dialogue and see if I could help and add value in any way.
Now, thank you very much. It was definitely a pleasure, spending time learning about your story. And I hope those who are listening actually do take time to pray and actually hear from God and go as He directs you. So stay tuned for next week's episode. And thank you again, Mr. Brian Adamson.
Thanks for having me, bro.